It's a primal fear wired into every parent's brain, the stranger approaching your child. But what happens when that stranger is a billionaire? Your instinct is wrong, and her simple gesture unlocks a secret buried for a generation. This is the story of Mark, a construction worker and single father to 5-year-old Lily, and tech billionaire Elise Vance. It's a collision of two worlds, where a split-second protective reflex in a city park unraveled a hidden biological truth, challenging everything we assume about family, class, and the instincts we trust to keep our children safe. So how did a simple hello to a little girl lead to a DNA test, a lawsuit, and a revelation that would rewrite two families forever? For Mark, every day began and ended with the same mission: keep Lily safe. A former Army engineer who left service after his wife's sudden death from an undiagnosed heart condition, he now worked commercial construction, his world reduced to concrete, steel, and the small, bright-eyed girl who was his entire universe. Their routine was sacred. Saturdays were for the playground at Kensington Park, the one with the new rubberized flooring and the security guard who patrolled occasionally. Mark would watch from a bench phone away as Lily, now 5, conquered the jungle gym. He'd done everything right since becoming the sole parent. The child safety courses, the strict check-ins, the constant vigilance against a world he'd come to see as full of unseen edges. His greatest fear wasn't a fall from the monkey bars. It was the friendly face, the kind gesture, the stranger who didn't look like a stranger at all. Elise Vance, on the other hand, lived in a world of curated access. At 34, she was the youngest self-made female billionaire in tech, her fortune built on a seismic data analytics platform that revolutionized oil discovery. Her public image was one of ruthless precision, sharp interviews, sleek black cars, a penthouse that looked over the city like a command center. But her private life was a vault. She was the subject of endless speculation, reclusive, driven, possibly lonely. The tabloids dubbed her the Silicon Sphinx. What few knew was that her drive was rooted in a profound private loss. 18 years earlier, as a 16-year-old sent to a discreet boarding school, she'd given birth to a daughter. The adoption was closed, orchestrated by her powerful parents to erase the incident. She signed the papers, and a part of her history was legally sealed away. She built an empire, but in the quiet moments, the memory was a phantom limb. The collision happened on a crisp Saturday afternoon in October. Mark was on his bench, tracking Lily's loop from the slide to the swings. He saw the woman first as a disruption in the park's scenery, a figure in an immaculate white coat standing too still, watching the children. His internal alarm, fine-tuned by years of hypervigilance, pinged softly. She didn't have a child with her. She wasn't on her phone. She was just observing. Then she moved, walking with purpose, not toward the exit, but directly toward the sandbox where Lily was digging a moat for her castle. Mark was on his feet before he consciously decided to move. Every lesson, every news story, every whispered fear shouted in his blood. He closed the distance in seconds. As he arrived, he saw the woman kneel, her coat pooling on the clean sand. She was speaking to Lily, her voice low. In her hand was not candy or a toy, but a small, polished stone, a piece of amber with a fossilized insect trapped inside. "I thought you might like this," the woman was saying. "It's very old and very special." That's when Mark's hand shot out, his body inserting itself as a barrier between his daughter and the stranger. "Step away from my daughter, now." His voice was low, gravelly, the tone he used when confronting a threat on a work site. The park fell silent around them. Other parents watched. The woman, Elise Vance, looked up, her expression not offended or frightened, but deeply, strangely sad. She slowly stood, raising her empty hands in a gesture of surrender. She didn't back away. Instead, she looked from Mark's fierce, protective glare down to Lily's curious face, then back to him. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "I didn't mean to frighten you. It's just, she has my mother's eyes, the exact same shade of sea green. I lost my mother last year, and for a moment seeing her," she trailed off, then seemed to gather herself, reaching into her coat pocket. She pulled out a business card, holding it by the corner for Mark to take. "My name is Elise Vance. This is who I am. I understand your reaction completely, Please check it. Run a background check. Do whatever you need to feel safe." She gave Lily one last, lingering look, then turned and walked away, leaving Mark standing there, the expensive cardstock pinched between his fingers, his heart hammering with a confusion that was slowly mutating into something else, a dawning, horrible suspicion. The drive home was quiet. Lily chattered about the nice lady and the cool bug rock. Mark was silent. That night, after tucking Lily in, he sat at his kitchen table with his laptop. He typed Elise Vance into the search bar. The screen flooded with images, Forbes covers, tech conference stages, a net worth listed at $3.2 billion. It was her. The sheer, absurd reality of it was paralyzing. A billionaire had approached his child in a public park. His mind raced through the explanations. A weird PR stunt. A predatory scheme too sophisticated to understand. But her words echoed. "She has my mother's eyes." He looked at the sleeping monitor feed at Lily's face. He'd always been told Lily had her mother's eyes. He never questioned it. The next morning, the first letter arrived. It was not an email, but actual, thick cream-colored stationery delivered by a courier. The letterhead was from the law firm of Sterling, Cole, and Wright. It was addressed formally to Mr. Mark. The language was precise, legal, and utterly disarming. It stated that Ms. Elise Vance wished to extend her sincerest apologies for any distress caused. Furthermore, in light of the unusual circumstances and her own recent personal loss, she was making an unprecedented offer. She would cover, through a neutral third-party service, the cost of a comprehensive, legally admissible paternity test for him and Lily, should he have any questions whatsoever about his biological parentage. The letter emphasized there was no expectation, no obligation, and no intended accusation. It was framed as an act of clarity, a gift of certainty in a confusing moment. Enclosed was a prepaid voucher for a top-tier genetic lab. Mark felt the world tilt. This wasn't a threat. It was a key being offered to a door he never knew existed. For a week, the voucher sat on his dresser like a live grenade. He stared at it while helping Lily with her shoes. He thought about it while welding beams 50 stories in the air. The offer preyed on a secret insecurity he'd never voiced. He and his wife had struggled with infertility for years. Lily was their miracle, conceived after their final round of IVF at a reputable clinic. The paperwork was in a lockbox. He'd never had a reason to doubt. But now, a single sentence from a stranger had injected a virus of uncertainty into the foundation of his life. The billionaire's calm observation wasn't just a comment, it was a hypothesis, and she was willing to bankroll the experiment. The pressure built until it cracked him. One Tuesday evening, driven by a need to kill the doubt or confirm his nightmare, he took Lily to the lab. He gave the fake name from the voucher. He held his daughter's hand as they swabbed her cheek. The technician said results would take 7 to 10 business days. Those were the longest days of Mark's life. The email arrived at 6:14 on a rainy Thursday morning. The subject line was simple: "Your genetic results are ready." Mark's hand shook as he clicked the link, entered the code, and waited for the PDF to load. The document was clinical, full of charts and percentages. He scrolled past the ancestry estimates, past the health markers, his eyes searching for the only line that mattered. There it was, in stark black and white text. Paternity analysis, probability of paternity, 0%. The words didn't compute at first, they were just shapes. Then their meaning detonated in his chest. 0%. He was not Lily's biological father. The little girl sleeping in the next room, the center of his universe for 5 years, was not his daughter by blood. The IVF had failed. A mistake had been made. A switch, an error, a catastrophic failure at the clinic. His mind spiraled into the implications, a black hole of legal and emotional chaos. But as he sat there, gasping in the pale light of his laptop, a second, more immediate realization crashed over him. Elise Vance hadn't just guessed. She had known. Which meant one terrifying thing: she knew who the biological mother was. The door was now open, and on the other side, waiting with all her power and resources, was a billionaire who had already found his child. The shock was a physical blow, a vacuum that stole the air from Mark's lungs. He sat at the kitchen table for an hour, the gray morning light bleeding into the room, the PDF glaring from his screen. 0%. The words were a verdict that annihilated the last 5 years of his life. His first coherent thought was not of the clinic or of Elise Vance, but of Lily's small hand in his as they walked to the lab. He had betrayed her by seeking this truth. He had invited the storm that was now tearing his world apart. His second thought was pure, tactical survival. He printed the results, then meticulously erased his digital footprint, deleting the email, clearing his browser history, shutting the laptop with a final click. He had to think. He had to move before the ground fully gave way. He called in sick to work, a first in 3 years. Then he called the only person he trusted, his older sister Carla. A nurse practitioner with a no-nonsense demeanor, she arrived within 40 minutes, her face etched with concern. He handed her the printed pages without a word. She read them, her professional composure crumbling into open-mouthed horror. "Oh, Mark, oh my God." For the next 2 hours, they dissected the catastrophe in frantic whispers while Lily watched cartoons in the living room. The chain of custody was solid. He'd used the voucher, but the lab was reputable. The results were undeniable. The conclusion was a nightmare triptych, a catastrophic failure at the fertility clinic, an unknown biological father, and a billionaire who seemed to hold a map to this minefield. "You have to talk to her," Carla insisted. "She didn't offer that test out of kindness. She knew it would trigger this. She's waiting for you to come to her." Getting to Elise Vance was not a matter of dialing a number. Mark still had the business card from the park. It listed a corporate switchboard. He called, was routed through 3 polite but impenetrable assistants, and was about to give up when he was unexpectedly connected to a man named David Sterling, the lead name on the law firm letterhead. Sterling's voice was calm, practiced, devoid of surprise. "Mr. Mark, we've been expecting your call. Ms. Vance would like to meet. She proposes a neutral location, with legal counsel present for both parties, at your earliest convenience." The meeting was set for the next day at 10 a.m. in a private conference room at the Downtown Bar Association. It was a battlefield drawn by her rules, on her terrain. Mark walked into that room feeling like a trespasser. The space was all dark wood and muted light. David Sterling, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a $1,000 suit, sat beside Elise Vance. Mark brought Carla for moral support. Elise looked different than in the park, softer, weary, her billionaire armor replaced by simple black. She spoke first. "Thank you for coming. Before we say anything else, I want to apologize again. My actions at the park were unconscionable. I was overwhelmed by a resemblance I had no right to act upon." Then she took a breath, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "The paternity test you took confirmed a truth you never suspected. The maternity test I took 3 months ago confirmed one I've feared for 18 years. She slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. It was a genetic report from a different, equally prestigious lab. The key line read, "Probability of maternity, 99.99%. Elise Vance was Lily's biological mother. The air left the room. Mark's mind, braced for a revelation about a donor mix-up, was shattered by this. This wasn't a clinic error. This was an adoption. Elise continued, her voice a monotone against the emotional tsunami in the room. "When I was 16, I became pregnant. My parents were influential, traditional. An adoption was arranged through a private agency to preserve the family's reputation. It was closed, sealed. I was told I would never know who the adoptive family was. I was told it was for the best." She paused, collecting herself. "I built a life. But after my mother died last year, I began searching in earnest. I hired investigators. Closed adoptions from that era have digital footprints if you know where to look and have the resources to pay for access. They traced the adoption to a couple, your wife, Susan, and you. The records showed you pursued IVF at the Lifewell Fertility Center shortly after finalizing the adoption. My daughter, our daughter, was placed with you as a newborn through the adoption agency. But you were led to believe the IVF procedure had succeeded." Mark felt the floor vanish. The IVF, the positive test, the celebration. The entire narrative of Lily's origin, the story he and his late wife had cherished, was a carefully constructed lie. The clinic hadn't mixed up samples, they had perpetrated a fraud. You're saying, Lifewell knew, they took our money for IVF knowing they would just give us an adopted baby? Elise nodded grimly. My investigators believe so. It was a dual-track scheme. For wealthy, desperate clients, they provided black market donor eggs or surrogates. For middle-class clients like you, who wouldn't question a miracle birth after years of failure, they sometimes placed adoptions they facilitated through shell agencies, charging you for the non-existent IVF procedure. You didn't get a switched embryo. You were never biological parents. You were targeted adoptive parents who didn't know you were adopting. Scale of the betrayal was monstrous. Mark's grief for his wife twisted into a new kind of agony. She had died believing a beautiful lie. His love for Lily was real, but its foundation was a criminal conspiracy. Elise's next words were cautious, measured. I'm not here to disrupt your life. You are her father in every way that matters, I see that. But I have a legal right to know my child. The sealed adoption can be challenged, especially given the fraud. I am willing to avoid that for an agreement. David Sterling smoothly placed a document in front of Mark. It was a draft custody and non-disclosure agreement. It proposed a structured reintroduction. Elise would have gradually increasing, supervised visitation with Lily. In return, she would not petition to overturn the adoption. She would also provide a substantial financial trust for Lily's future. And Mark would sign a binding NDA, never speaking of the clinic fraud or Elise's biological connection. It was a buyout of his silence and a purchase of partial access. Mark stood up, the chair screeching behind him. You want me to sell you time with my daughter, after you lied, after that clinic stole my wife's last years with a lie? Elise's calm facade finally cracked, her eyes glistening. I lost 18 years. I'm trying to find a way forward that doesn't end in a courtroom that will tear her apart. I'm trying to be reasonable with the leverage I hold. The meeting exploded into a tangle of accusations, grief, and legal threats before dissolving. Mark stormed out, the unsigned agreement left on the table. He now had two adversaries, a powerful biological mother and a predatory fertility clinic. Driven by a fury that overrode all fear, Mark's next stop was the Lifewell Fertility Center. He didn't have an appointment. He walked into the serene, beige waiting room and demanded to see the director. When a nervous administrator tried to usher him into a private office, he refused, his voice rising, drawing the stares of other hopeful couples. I want to know what you did to my family. I want the records for procedure number 74299. The director, a Dr. Heiress Thorne, was summoned. A man in his 50s with a soothing, practiced demeanor, he attempted to calm Mark, invoking patient confidentiality. Mark slammed the folded paternity results on the reception desk. Confidentiality. You gave me a child that wasn't mine and billed me for $40,000 in IVF treatments. That's not medicine. That's fraud. The color drained from Dr. Thorne's face. He swiftly guided Mark, now a volatile liability, into a secure back office. The performance of concern vanished. Mr. Mark, you need to understand the context of 15 years ago. Regulations were looser. The desire to help create families sometimes led to creative solutions. His explanation was a chilling confession wrapped in corporate jargon. He admitted Lifewell had worked with a now-defunct adoption agency called New Beginnings. Small number of cases where IVF was unlikely to succeed, but the emotional and financial investment was high. They had facilitated alternative pathways to parenthood. He insisted the children were lovingly placed and that parents were overjoyed. He called it a pragmatic consolidation of services. Mark felt sick. You lied, you committed fraud, and my wife died believing your lie. Thorne's tone turned cold. The statute of limitations for medical fraud in this state is 6 years. Your procedure was over 5 years ago. Any legal action would be complicated and emotionally devastating for your child, whose origin story would become a public spectacle. Ms. Vance's lawyers have already contacted us. We are prepared to defend our legacy. The threat was clear: sue us and we'll drag Lily's history through the mud. And we have a billionaire on the sidelines who might join the fight. Mark left Lifewell feeling more trapped than ever. He was boxed in by law, by power, and by time. He consulted a family law attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Angela Reed. She reviewed the custody agreement from Elise and the fragmentary evidence against Lifewell. Her prognosis was grim. The adoption is legally sound, Mark. You are her legal father. But a biological mother with Elise Vance's resources can file a petition to overturn a sealed adoption, especially alleging fraud in the inducement. It would be a brutal, years-long case, but she could force it. This agreement, she tapped the document, is her offering you a deal to avoid that war. It's coercive, but it might be the least bad option. When Mark asked about suing Lifewell, Angela sighed. The statute of limitations is a wall, and to prove fraud, you'd need witnesses, internal documents. Lifewell has deep pockets and has survived scandals before. They'll bury you in motions until you're bankrupt. For 2 weeks, a tense stalemate held. Mark cared for Lily, each hug now laced with a terrible secret. Elise's lawyers called twice, politely inquiring if he had reconsidered the agreement. Then the first public ripple appeared. A tech blogger digging into Vance's unusual quiet period published a speculative piece titled, "Is the Silicon Sphinx Facing a Personal Crisis?" It mentioned anonymous sources spotting her in family court offices. The article was vague, but it was a spark. Mark realized the precarious balance. Elise's world was one of intense scrutiny. A custody battle would be front-page news. His world was one of fragile normalcy. A scandal would upend Lily's life. They were in a mutual standoff, each holding a detonator to the other's life. The pivot came from the past. Carla, using her medical network, tracked down a former Lifewell embryologist who'd left under cloudy circumstances years ago. The woman, now living in another state and terrified, agreed to a shielded video call. Her face was gaunt with anxiety. "I remember the new Begnites cases," she whispered. "It wasn't just a few. It was a system. They had code names. Package delivery for an adopted placement when IVF failed. I objected. I was pushed out." Then she offered a sliver of hope. The director Thorne, he was paranoid. He kept a personal log, a physical book, not digital. He called it his insurance policy. If it still exists, it has dates, codes, payments. It would list your case. It would list the source of the child. Mark's blood ran cold. The source of the child. That log could directly connect Lifewell to Elise's teenage pregnancy, proving the entire chain of fraud. It was the weapon that could threaten both the clinic and Elise's carefully controlled narrative. But finding it meant breaking into the lion's den. Mark now faced an impossible choice. Sign Elise's agreement and live with a managed lie, or go to war by hunting for a secret book that could blow everything up, exposing Lily's origin, inviting retaliation from a billion-dollar clinic, and potentially enraging a biological mother with everything to lose. He was standing over 2 plungers, each promising a different kind of destruction. And as he tucked Lily into bed that night, her small voice asked a question that stopped his heart. "Daddy, is the sad lady from the park my friend?" He had run out of time to hide. The next move would have to be a strike. The question hung in the air, innocent and devastating. Mark forced a smile, smoothing Lily's hair. "Just a nice lady, sweetheart. Now sleep tight." He closed the door, his resolve hardening in the darkened hallway. Signing the agreement meant surrendering to a lifetime of managed deception. He couldn't do it. The former soldier in him chose the mission. Find the logbook. He called Carla. Using her medical credentials, she confirmed Dr. Thorne's schedule. He would be at a medical conference in another city for 2 days, leaving his private office vulnerable. The plan was simple and terrifying. Mark's construction company had recently done minor work at the Lifewell building. He still had a contractor keycard for the service entrance, due to be deactivated the following week. It was a fragile window. 2 nights later, dressed in dark clothing, Mark approached the sleek medical building after midnight. The service entrance used for deliveries was in a blind spot of the main security cameras. His old keycard blinked a green light. The door clicked open. His heart hammered against his ribs as he slipped inside, guided by Carla's memorized floor plan. The offices were dark, illuminated only by exit signs. Dr. Thorne's corner office was locked, but the lock was a standard commercial grade. Mark, using skills from his Army engineering days, picked it in under 60 seconds. The room smelled of leather and antiseptic. He used a penlight, sweeping the desk, the shelves, the filing cabinets. No book. He checked behind framed diplomas under the desk. Nothing. Panic began to rise. Then his light caught the edge of a large, outdated medical encyclopedia on the bottom shelf. It seemed incongruous. He pulled the volume out. It was hollow. Inside the carved-out pages rested a worn, leather-bound ledger. His hands trembled as he opened it. The entries were in neat, small handwriting using clinical abbreviations and codes. He found his wife's name, his own. The entry was chilling. Client pair 74,299. IVF cycle failed, no viable blasts. Package arranged via NB. Source, female 16 premium genetic educational index. Fee, 80K to NB, 120K from clients. Narrative, IVF success. Delivery date, 5/23. The cold transaction of his daughter's life took his breath away. He flipped further, his horror growing. Page after page documented similar cases over nearly 15 years, dozens of them. The NB code New Beginnings was everywhere. The source descriptors varied, ages, backgrounds, even notes like college athlete or high SAT. This wasn't just fraud. It was a clandestine adoption ring, masquerading as a fertility clinic dealing in bobbies. He took photos with his phone, methodically capturing every page. The evidence was now in his hands. But as he was about to leave, a final, loose note slipped from the back of the ledger. It was a printed email dated just 3 weeks prior. The subject line, Containment Protocol Vance Inquiry. It was from Thorne to an unnamed recipient. The text read, "The primary source for 74,299 has initiated contact. She is EV Resource Extreme. Our agreement with NB included absolute confidentiality. If she litigates, the entire pipeline is exposed. Activate the firewall, discredit the father if necessary. Use the incident from his service record." Mark's blood turned to ice. They knew Elise was digging, and they were preparing to destroy him. What incident? He fled the office, the ledger tucked under his jacket. He was back in his car, the damning book on the passenger seat before the adrenaline crash hit. He had the weapon. But the email indicated Lifewell was already mobilizing against him and Elise. They weren't just on defense, they were planning a preemptive strike. He drove straight to his lawyer Angela's house, waking her. She scanned the photos, her professional calm evaporating. This is evidence of systematic racketeering, fraud, and likely violations of federal adoption laws. This isn't just a civil case anymore. But Mark, that email, used the incident from his service record. You need to tell me what that means. Now. Mark slumped into a chair. He had buried it for years. During his final deployment, his unit had been involved in a complex infrastructure project. A subcontractor, suspected of bribing local officials, was killed in an unrelated attack. Mark had raised concerns about the contractor's ties months earlier. An internal review cleared him of any wrongdoing, but a whisper campaign among some colleagues suggested he had a role in painting a target on the man. It was false, but the mud stuck just enough to make his exit from the service feel bitter. It's nothing, but they can spin it to look like I have a history of conflicts that turn deadly. They'll paint me as unstable, vengeful. Angela's face was grim. They're going to attack your character to discredit any allegations you make. And with a billionaire on the other side of this, the media will feast on it. We need to get ahead of this. We need to go to the authorities with this ledger now asterisk before they spin their narrative. But going to the authorities meant making everything public instantly. Lily's life would be a headline before breakfast. Mark felt trapped again, holding a bomb he couldn't safely detonate. The following morning, the first countermove arrived, not from Lifewell but from Elise. David Sterling called. His tone had changed from polite to urgent. "Ms. Vance has received a communication from Lifewell's legal counsel. They are aware of your break-in. They are prepared to file criminal burglary and corporate espionage charges against you by the end of the day. They also hinted they possess information damaging to your personal character they will release to the press. The clinic was playing hardball, tying Mark's fate to Elise. Sterling continued, Ms. Vance can make this go away. Her legal team can intervene, pressure Lifewell to stand down on the charges. But in return, she needs the physical ledger and your signature on the amended agreement by 5 p.m. today. This is the last off-ramp, Mark. Take it, or you go to jail, and a custody battle happens anyway with you behind bars. It was a brutal squeeze play. Hand over the evidence and submit or face destruction. Mark refused. He called Angela, who advised him to preemptively go to the district attorney's office, disclose the break-in, and surrender the ledger as part of a whistleblower disclosure. It was a huge risk, banking on the DA seeing the bigger crime. At 2 p.m., Mark and Angela walked into the DA's white-collar crime unit. The meeting was tense. The assistant DA, a weary-looking man named Garcia, listened to the story, examined the ledger, and saw the scale. He agreed the evidence pointed to major crimes, but the break-in was a problem. I can't grant you immunity, but I can agree to pursue the fraud investigation aggressively and consider your cooperation as a mitigating factor if charges are filed. You need to leave the book with me. It was a fragile shield. Mark handed over the physical ledger, feeling both relief and profound vulnerability. He was now a witness in a criminal case, and his illegal act was on record. He returned home exhausted to find Carla waiting, her face pale. There's a reporter from the Tribune downstairs. He's asking about allegations of stalking and harassment against a tech CEO. Mark, they've started. Lifewell had made good on its threat. By 6 p.m., a thinly sourced but damaging article appeared online. It centered on Elise Vance seeking a restraining order against a troubled former soldier who was obsessed after a chance meeting. It cited anonymous sources describing Mark, history of confrontation, and mentioned the old, unsubstantiated rumors from his service. The article was carefully crafted, just hinting at a connection to a fertility clinic without stating it, framing Mark as the aggressor and Elise as a victim. The public narrative was being poisoned. Elise's response was swift and public. At 8 p.m., her official spokesperson released a statement. Ms. Vance has had a brief, incidental encounter with an individual. Any suggestion of an ongoing dispute or legal action is false. She respects this individual's privacy and asks that others do the same. It was a masterful, neutral deflection that didn't confirm or deny the tabloid story, but made her look reasonable. Mark realized she was playing a deeper game, trying to keep the waters calm for her own ends. The next 48 hours were a blur of silent dread. Then at 9 in the evening, his doorbell rang. It wasn't a reporter or a process server. It was Elise Vance alone, without her lawyer or a coat. She looked exhausted, her composure gone. May I come in, please? It's about to get much worse for both of us. Stunned, he let her in. She didn't sit. I received a subpoena today. The district attorney's office, based on evidence provided, is opening a grand jury investigation into Lifewell and New Beginnings. I am a material witness. So are you. They have the ledger. Mark was confused. That's good, isn't it? Elise shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. My investigators dug deeper while you were getting the book. New Beginnings didn't just handle my case. It was a front. The Bobbies didn't just come from scared teenagers. Some of the sources. They were vulnerable women from overseas, poor mothers coerced into signing papers they didn't understand. Some might have been outright trafficked. The revelation was a sucker punch. The fraud was now potentially an international human trafficking operation. Elise continued, her voice trembling. Our daughter, may not have been voluntarily relinquished. If her birth was part of something criminal, my parental rights could be void, but so could your adoption. The state could take her into custody as the child of a crime. This was the "it gets worse" moment that dwarfed all others. It wasn't just about money, fraud, or custody. It was about Lily being potentially the victim of a crime, with her family ties to everyone. Mark, Elise, rendered uncertain in the eyes of the law. Mark sank onto the couch, the world collapsing inward. Elise sat across from him, the chasm of money and status gone, replaced by shared terror. "I didn't know," she whispered, tears finally falling. "I thought it was a closed adoption, a shameful family secret, not this, never this." In that moment, the dynamic shifted irreversibly. They were no longer adversaries in a custody fight. They were two parents standing over a trapdoor that was about to open beneath their child. The enemy was no longer each other, or even just the greedy clinic. The enemy was a shadowy system that could erase Lily's place in both their lives entirely. Elise looked at him, a raw, desperate alliance in her gaze. "They will come for us both now. They will try to discredit us, separate us, make us look complicit or crazy. We have one chance. We have to get in front of this together. We have to go to the authorities with everything we have, and we have to do it with one story. We are her parents, and we are fighting to keep our daughter safe from the people who sold her." The war had just transformed. The battle lines were redrawn. It was no longer Mark versus Elise versus Lifewell. It was parents versus the machine, and they had to move before the machine swallowed their child whole. In the quiet of Mark's living room, with the specter of a trafficking ring hanging between them, a pact was forged not on paper but on pure necessity. They had one night to align their stories. Mark's lawyer, Angela, and Elise's lead attorney, David Sterling, were summoned for an emergency conference call. The old adversarial tension was gone, replaced by a grim, focused energy. The strategy was aggressive. They would march into the district attorney's office together first thing in the morning, present a united front, and offer full, coordinated cooperation. They would frame themselves not as victims seeking redress, but as material witnesses and parents determined to protect their child from further harm. Elise would use her resources to fund a parallel, private investigation to trace the new Begnites network overseas, feeding findings to the authorities. Mark would be the public face of the clinic's betrayal, his everyman story a powerful counter-narrative to Lifewell's coming smear campaign. For Lily's safety, they agreed she would stay with Carla for the initial volatile period. The next morning, they walked into the DA's office side by side. The sight of the construction worker and the tech billionaire, united, immediately changed the calculus. Assistant DA Garcia listened intently as they laid out the entire timeline, from the park to the ledger to the trafficking fears. He was particularly interested in Elise's investigators, preliminary findings on new Begnites, international connections. By the end of the day, the investigation was elevated to a joint task force with the FBI. The burglary charges against Mark were formally set aside, his actions reclassified as whistleblower intervention in an ongoing felony. The legal shield, while fragile, was now in place. The public unraveling began 3 days later. The DA's office, wanting to control the narrative, held a press conference announcing a major investigation into the Lifewell Fertility Center and its affiliates for fraud, racketeering, and potential violations of federal adoption and trafficking laws. They did not name specific victims, but the scale of the allegations was enough. Media focus instantly pivoted from the salacious billionaire stalker tale to a major white-collar crime story. Reporters descended on Lifewell. Dr. Thorne was photographed leaving his home, face ashen, refusing to comment. The clinic's website went dark. Their lawyers issued a statement denying all wrongdoing and vowing to cooperate, but the tide had turned. The dominoes fell quickly. Within a week, 3 former Lifewell employees, including the embryologist Mark had spoken to, came forward to the FBI with stories of pressure, coded language, and their own suspicions. A fourth, a former administrator, provided a digital backup of financial records that mirrored the ledger's codes, showing millions in unexplained payments to shell companies linked to new Begnites. The FBI traced one of those shells to a holding company in Cyprus, and from there to a network of facilitators in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. Elise's private investigators, working in tandem, uncovered a pattern. New Begnites had targeted young women in economic distress, offering them educational opportunities or medical care in exchange for signing opaque adoption papers. Some bobbies, like Lily, had come from more local, closed adoptions like Elise. Others had far more sinister origins. For Mark and Elise, the immediate battle was keeping Lily secure and sane amidst the chaos. They agreed on a temporary, practical arrangement. Lily would primarily live with Mark, maintaining the only home she'd ever known. Elise would have scheduled gradual visits, starting in a neutral play therapy setting. The first meeting was agonizing. A child therapist's office, toys scattered on the floor. Elise entered, visibly nervous. Lily, holding Mark's hand, looked at her and said, "You're the park lady." Elise knelt, tears in her eyes. "I am, and I'm so happy to see you again." They colored together for 20 minutes. It was small, fragile, and monumental. Mark watched from the corner, his heart a knot of protective jealousy and reluctant understanding. The legal proceedings against Lifewell became a sprawling, multi-year federal case. Dr. Thorne and 4 other senior staff were indicted on 47 counts including wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Thorne's insurance policy, Ledger, was the cornerstone of the prosecution. In a desperate bid for leniency, he offered to testify against the overseas operators, confirming the trafficking pipeline. The clinic was shuttered, its assets seized. Civil suits from dozens of other defrauded parents began piling up, a class action that would eventually result in a $150 million settlement. But for the families, the money was a bitter token. They had been robbed of truth, and for some, of any genetic connection to their children. For Mark and Elise, the federal case had a very specific, personal outcome. Because Lily's adoption was facilitated by a criminal enterprise, its legal standing was suddenly in question. The state's child welfare agency conducted an emergency review. The result was a Solomon-like decision that recognized the extraordinary circumstances. Mark's adoption was allowed to stand, as he was deemed a victim of the fraud and Lily's psychological parent. Elise's biological maternity was also formally recognized. The court, in a rare move, issued a unique dual parentage order, granting them both legal parental rights. It was not a traditional custody split, but a court-mandated co-parenting agreement, with Mark as primary custodian and Elise having defined, substantial visitation and decision-making rights. It was messy, unprecedented, and the only way to prevent Lily from becoming a ward of the state. The media storm eventually subsided, replaced by a tense, new normal. Elise bought a house in Mark's neighborhood, a modest one by her standards, to be close. They established routines, Wednesday dinners every other weekend. Lily, resilient and young, adapted faster than the adults. She began calling Elise Mama Elise to distinguish her from the pictures of Mama Susan in her bedroom. Mark had to swallow his grief every time he heard it. His alliance with Elise was functional, built on shared dread and love for Lily, but it was not friendship. It was a careful, diplomatic peace. The final surprise came a year after the verdict, from an unexpected quarter. Elise's mother, before her death, had left a sealed letter with her attorney, to be delivered to Elise only if the past child ever resurfaced. Elise brought the letter to one of their painfully polite co-parenting meetings. Her hands shook as she read it aloud to Mark. In it, her mother confessed to knowing the adoption agency was disreputable, but used them precisely because they asked no questions and guaranteed absolute secrecy. She wrote of her shame, her fear for the family's standing, and her hope that the child had gone to a good home. But the last line was a thunderclap. The father was not the boy from school. It was the genetics tutor we hired, a brilliant postgraduate student. I paid him to disappear. Your daughter may have his intellect. Elise had spent 18 years believing Lily's father was a teenage boyfriend. The truth was a cold, financial transaction arranged by her own mother. The revelation stripped another layer of myth from Lily's origin story. There was no romance, just another layer of exploitation. This new knowledge forced a final, quiet shift in Mark and Elise's relationship. The last illusions were gone. They were not bound by a shared, tragic love story, but by a chain of greed and lies that had miraculously produced a child they both adored. The common ground was no longer just Lily, but their shared status as casualties of other people's corruption. Mark found he could relax slightly around Elise. The billionaire armor was gone, replaced by the weariness of a woman whose life had been built on false premises. She, in turn, saw past the protective, bristling exterior to the exhausted, devoted father beneath. On Lily's 7th birthday, they held a joint party in Mark's backyard. Carla was there, along with a few kids from Lily's class. Mark grilled burgers. Elise, looking utterly out of her element, handled the cake. As Lily blew out the candles, she made a wish. She shouted out, "I wish for more days with both my dads and moms." She meant Mark and the memory of Susan, and Elise and the phantom tutor. The adults fell silent, a complex web of loss and love hanging in the air. Later, as they cleaned up, Elise said to Mark, "We're a family, aren't we? The most broken, patched-together, legally mandated family in history." Mark, wiping ketchup off a table, gave a small, genuine smile for the first time. "Yeah, I guess we are." The story that began with a protective arm thrust out in a park didn't end with a simple reunion or a vicious battle. It ended with a daily, deliberate choice. The billionaire and the construction worker, bound by a child and a crime, learned to share a life they never planned. They built a fragile bridge between their worlds, not for their own sake, but for the little girl who now had a father who fought for her, and a mother who crossed an ocean of secrecy to find her. The instinct that made Mark step forward that day was right. There was a threat, but the threat wasn't the woman in the white coat. It was the hidden system that had commodified his daughter's life before she was even born, and in the end, against all odds, they had pulled her free from it together. So what became of the park, the instinct, and the bracelet of trust that was broken and remade? Mark still takes Lily to Kensington on Saturdays. The bench is the same. The playground sounds are the same. But the man watching is different. The hypervigilance is still there, a veteran's habit, but the fear has been refined. He no longer sees every stranger as a potential threat. He sees them as people carrying unseen stories, hidden fractures, just like he was. Elise joins them sometimes, sitting beside him. Two sentinels who learned the hard way that the real danger often wears a lab coat and a sympathetic smile, not a stranger's face. Lily is growing up in a world with two mothers, one present, one a cherished memory, and a father who moved heaven and earth to keep her. She knows a simplified version of her story, that she is very loved by many people, and that some bad people once tried to tell lies about families. The full weight of the ledger, the trafficking, the cold transaction of her beginning, will wait for when she's older. For now, the lesson she absorbs is that family is not a single truth written in DNA, but a choice reinforced every day by showing up. The Lifewell case sent shockwaves through the multi-billion-dollar fertility industry. New regulations were passed, mandating audited chain of custody for all genetic materials and transparent, centralized reporting for third-party adoptions. Several other clinics were investigated and shut down. But the deeper, unsettling question the story raises remains. In our legitimate, desperate desire for family, how many other silent crimes have we unwittingly financed? How many other origin stories are built on lies that love has papered over? The system Mark and Elise exposed preyed on two primal human drives, the drive to have a child and the drive to hide a mistake. It turned vulnerability into a business model. Elise Vance did not return to her previous, isolated public life. She diverted a significant portion of her venture capital fund into nonprofits focused on ethical adoption reform and support for women in crisis pregnancies. Her public identity is now tied to this cause. The Silicon Sphinx is gone, replaced by a more complex, more human figure who speaks openly about loss, redemption, and the price of secrets. Mark continues in construction, but he also works part-time as a peer counselor for other parents navigating the often Byzantine world of adoption and fertility services. He helps them ask the right questions, to trust but verify. He keeps the voucher for the DNA test, the one that started it all, framed in his home office. Not as a souvenir of pain, but as a reminder that sometimes The truth that shatters you is the only thing that can eventually make you whole. The story that began with a gesture of fear in a park ends with a quiet revolution in two ordinary lives. It asks us to examine our own instincts. That gut feeling that says asterisk danger asterisk, is it a shield or a blindfold? For Mark, his instinct to protect was correct, but its target was utterly wrong. The real enemy was invisible, entrenched, wearing the mask of help. His journey, and Elise's, is a testament to the fact that while love for a child can be the most powerful force on earth, it is also the force most easily exploited by those who know how to sell miracles. In the end, this isn't just a story about a dad and a billionaire. It's a story about the stories we tell ourselves to survive. It's about the families we build from the broken pieces left by others' greed. And it's a warning that in a world where life itself can be commodified, the most radical act of love is not just to protect, but to see clearly, to question the beautiful lie, and to fight, not just for the child in front of you, but for the truth behind them. If you believe that every family's truth, no matter how complicated, deserves to be told, then subscribe.